no regulations have been complied with.
The developer's progress has to be monitored by the bank.
Consumers must also go and visit the properties periodically.
Give a chance to RERA.
As far as banking is concerned, RERA doesn't have a role to play.
It was just funding that the developer was organizing through you as a consumer.
Bank has to make a disclosure whether they have approved the project or not. There is a public trust attached to the banking operations.
Hi, welcome to the Property Show. I'm Jayashree Kurup, I'm editor, MBTV. I'm talking about decoding festive offers. Diwali is round the corner. Lots of developers have come up with various schemes to push their projects through. We would like to caution you, please see that it falls on the right side of the law. And to discuss this issue, we have with us Shailin Raina. He is MD Residential Services of Cushman & Wakefield. Thanks, Shailin, for joining us. Manish Patni, he's a home buyer. He's taught himself the law, become a lawyer, and he's taking on the banking system for the defaults that they have committed and the errors that they have committed. Thank you for joining us. The first thing that the consumer gets, and that is pay 10% and you can pay the rest when you get your house. Help us understand, is this a good offer for the buyer?
You know, when we look at this scheme, earlier these schemes were offered in a subvention format, which is no more existing today. I would say that, you know, a 1090 or a 2080 is not really happening too much in the market now. So as long as the builder can manage the liquidity part and can manage the construction of the project on time, and, you know, as a consumer, it is your job to check whether the builder can construct the project on time. I don't think there's any risk attached to it.
How can a consumer figure out whether the financials are in place?
Do these checks through banks.
If a developer offers me, and as a consumer, I hear pay 5% now, the rest on possession, pay 10% now, should I trust that deal?
Even overseas and globally, this is how the format works, where you pay maybe 20-30% upfront and balance you pay at the time of possession. All these projects will be approved by banks. These projects, the liquidity, as he said, will come from the banks again. So we have to understand what went wrong in the subvention scheme earlier, except for the fact that the builders were supposed to pay the interest to the bank. There was a whole lot of other aspects to it. One was the construction stages. They had to be monitored by the banks, which were not done. Today you have that monitoring mechanism with RERA. Does that... RERA only talks about reporting. I don't think RERA has a mechanism to go and inspect every project and inspect it. So there is no way. If the banks who are lending for the project do not do a strict due diligence and do not monitor the construction activity and ensure completion of the project by timelines, the same situation could arise. Let's understand what this means. When a bank lends to a developer, what is it that the bank has to do? Traditionally, banks have been taking the valuation of the project into account, and they take about 50 or 70% of the cost of the project and fund it. They give this money in 3 or 4 stages. But they are not really very concerned. So far, they have not been very concerned about the completion of the project. If the banks do not do the due diligence, if the banks do not take care of the construction progress, if the banks do not take care of the compliances, we could end up into a similar situation. So I think NHB, RBI have to do 2 things. They must come out with very detailed guidelines as to how it should happen. Second, they must have mechanism in place to act against such banks who are not following the guidelines and the regulatory provisions. Because the biggest problem in this whole business has been that no regulations have been complied with.
From a consumer standpoint, you know, if you look at people, you know, living in rented houses currently and wanting to buy a house, and they plan to move in there by 3-4 years, and if this kind of a plan comes into the table, I think, you know, if they do the due diligence right, I don't think it's not a bad idea to also look at PLPs today as well, provided, you know, the due diligence on the developer is in place. Today, if a consumer sees that project A is complete and I can buy a completed unit at a slightly higher rate, there is another developer who's telling me pay 1 rupee as a booking amount and get finance up to 95%. Decode that for the consumer and talk in the consumer's lingo. I wouldn't really buy that project because that seems too dicey for me. You know, I would, like I said, you know, I would stick to payment plans which are more like, you know, 30-70, or where there's a 30% to be paid in maybe 6 months, which are more rational and more sensible in nature, and where I feel that the developer has the capability to develop the project in a timely manner. all those schemes running in the current period, which talk about the gold coins, the cars, the holiday packages thrown in, I wouldn't really buy products like that.
Pay 10% now and get a pre-EMI holiday up to 36 months. Pay only ₹1 as booking amount and get finance up to 95%. 0% EMI till possession and 0% down payment. Pay 25%, the rest on possession. Pay 10% now and live free for 2 years. Help us decode these schemes.
So I'll start with the last one.
Right.
Pay 10% now and live free for 2 years, which means the project is completed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I don't see there is any risk there.
Right.
Even if it comes at a slight premium, one must go in for it.
If you can collect your money, be a very disciplined investor, pay your 10%, live for 2 years, but what Manish is suggesting is use that 2 years to save up your money, put down the principal amount so that the amount you have to pay back is less.
Yeah,
right?
but there is a second part to it. Again, what is happening, the subvention scheme has been very smartly tweaked.
Pay 25%, rest on possession.
If he says give me 25% over say 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, and you think the developer is a credible developer, provided you do a due diligence, I think this is something again which can be looked at.
2575 is the scheme which was actually restricted by NHB.
That's right.
Right? So what has changed is still 2575. The only thing that has changed is the banks will say, oh, we will not take interest from the builder directly, you pay it to the consumer. So when you are talking about 25 now and 75 at the time of possession, if it's purely like that, it's a fantastic scheme, one should go in for it. But if it means that
You have to
25 now, 75 loan, till possession we will foot the bill, and after that
So that becomes a subvention in that case.
Yeah, so I'm just going back because what circular says is that the subvention scheme relating to interest payment by developer is restricted.
So I am presuming that this is a non-subvention scheme, so it's a developer's subvention where the developer is funding the project, because obviously subventions aren't there in the market today. So going by that, I still think it's a great scheme.
At least this Diwali can we help consumers to get the best deals without compromising their own security into the future.
The flip side is the same, the developer's progress has to be monitored by the bank. The developer has to deliver the project on time. At this point in time, we should give a chance to RERA. We should think positive, and we should look at things and driven from a consumer point of view, we should look at things more positively.
These are great schemes. As long as retail lending is not involved, if it is involved, then one has to be careful.
While you talk about subvention or no subvention, for a consumer, it was always pay 20% now, 80% at possession. If I didn't have all the money and I could put down 20%, which a bank said I'll pay on your behalf, I thought it was a great idea as a consumer, because then it took the pain away from me, except that it gave me immense pain because the project was not complete. When the builder stopped paying, the banks got me by the throat.
It was just funding that the developer was organizing through you as a consumer. It is project funding they were getting indirectly. The developer wouldn't get lending at 8.5%. So they were organizing for a win-win situation for both of us. For the consumers as well as the developers. So when there's no subvention, the risk is obviously lesser, because
how that was subvention and this is not subvention.
So in case of a subvention, you pay a down payment which is 10%, 15%, and the 75%, 80% funding is done by the bank on your behalf. While the developer offers you EMI holiday for 3 to 4 years, the loan is in your name. So which means the accountability to pay to the bank is in your name. It is your credit worthiness on which the builder is getting the money. So obviously there's a risk attached to it. If the project doesn't get completed on time, the loan is on your head. So this is a more risky proposition. If you look at a pure PLP, which is a developer's PLP, where there's no loan taken on your name, there the risk is hedged. The only risk that you have is that you paid the 20%, which is gone from your savings or from your pocket. So that is the risk which is there, but you don't have a loan standing on your head, which is like a 75% loan. Only in case of construction linked plans, you can take a loan. Otherwise, for PLPs, subvention, obviously now with NHB, having said that, given a notification to NFCs that they can't, HFCs to not lend the money through subventions.
Yeah.
So, I don't think subvention is going to happen anyway now. So
we won't call it subvention.
I said it's a great scheme if there is no loan attached. But my simple question is that there are so many schemes being floated by the developers. Some can afford to pay those EMIs even if they agree to give it to the home buyers, and home buyers would know which developers are those. But when these schemes come out at large in the market, the builders, how many builders will be able to foot the construction cost themselves? And therefore, lending will come into play. In a small city, he goes and buys a property under the same scheme. Now, that builder may not be a great builder. What should he do? Yeah. That builder will say, okay, you take the loan, I will give you the EMI. The bank is not getting into the subvention part anymore. Now, if that is the only change, then people need to be really careful. And that is where due diligence by the banks falls in place. Consumers must also go and visit the properties periodically. If the bank is not doing their job, they must alert the bank by writing to them that, see, this was the milestone which has not been achieved. They must be careful while giving disbursement requests to the bank and making payments to the builders. I think these are the checks and balances which have to be brought in.
Would you like to say what the consumer should do?
They should talk to the developer. They should also connect with the bank and apprise the bank of the fact that the construction hasn't happened, and all the necessary corrections should be taken.
Go to RERA.
As far as banking is concerned, RERA doesn't have a role to play. My suggestion from this platform to both Reserve Bank of India and National Housing Bank would be, they must instruct the banks to give a copy of the project approval given by the bank to the home buyer while giving a loan. It must be mandatory, because that is where a bank has to make a disclosure whether they have approved the project or not. That is one. Second thing, there has to be a review process for every project approval. You can't approve the project now and let it be good for next 10 years until it's delivered. Because you can't expect a consumer after 10 years to suddenly be taken by surprise, oh, there was something wrong. And the bank says, look, we did the due diligence for ourselves, we never did for you. You should have done the due diligence. Because banks per se, they also come into the purview of public policies. So there is a public trust attached to the banking operations. So when a bank says we have approved a project, what would the consumer do? He would believe the bank. He has no option but to believe the bank. And that is where the banks have to become accountable.
If the project is not missing its deadlines, the bank should revise its approval. Is that what you're saying?
They must actually at least notify the customer that this is what is happening and what are the steps they are taking. And the last and the most important thing, where there is no retail lending, all banks who are giving loans for projects must make sure that their hypothecation or mortgage or lien, whatever they term it as, must be notified very clearly on every allotment letter of the builder, on every brochure, every advertisement. Because a home buyer should not be taken by surprise after 3 years that, oh, this was mortgaged elsewhere.
I think this is a very, very critical point. I think this is something which I am sure most of the consumers won't know. They think that, they have taken a loan and so obviously it's good for them. But if the builders at the back mortgage the product, then that's a big risk they're running. So I think very, very valid point.
That's very important. That is very important, and that should become a part of their disclosure. It is actually anyway as per the regulations and court orders, but banks don't follow it. Banks don't follow it.
So there we are. There are plenty of festive offers in the market today. It's Diwali time. You may want to pick up a house, and you may want to pick up at the right price and with the relevant discounts. But here is a show that helps you decode those discounts and help you understand whether the property that you're buying is something that you will also benefit from. Thank you so much for watching The Property Show.